They called it, "The Train That Never Arrived." Most people dismissed it as nothing more than a story whispered in dark corners of Europe's old railway stations, a bedtime ghost tale meant to frighten children. But legends, when told often enough, tend to leave behind shadows of truth. And in this case, those shadows stretched across decades. In the summer of 1953, a passenger train departed from a station in northern Italy. Its destination was supposed to be Zurich. Tickets were sold, passengers boarded, and eyewitnesses confirmed the train pulling away with steam and thunder. Dozens of families, businessmen, soldiers, and ordinary travelers were inside. Yet, according to the records, the train never arrived. Not in Zurich, not anywhere. It simply disappeared. I wouldn't have believed it myself had I not stumbled upon a file while researching another case in the city archives. The folder was worn, the ink fading, but the stamped words on the cover were unmistakable. Ferrovia Scomparsa, 1953. The Vanished Railway. Inside were copies of frantic telegrams, station reports, and witness statements. The tone of the officials changed over time, from confusion to denial and finally, silence. It was as if the incident had been swallowed whole. No official investigation, no closure for the families. The case had simply been buried. That was the moment my curiosity turned into obsession, because there were details the public never heard. A night watchman claimed he saw the train enter a tunnel outside the city, yet no one saw it emerge. Another account mentioned thick white fog rolling in just as the locomotive disappeared. And there was one more thing. 2 passengers who, for reasons unknown, missed the train that day. Their testimonies suggested something far stranger than a derailment or technical failure. They spoke of screams echoing from inside the tunnel, and lights that didn't belong to any train they had ever seen. Still, the trail was cold. The families of the missing had been silenced. The newspapers who tried to run the story were threatened, their editors warned to let it rest. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary disappearance. Because scattered through the records were notes, half erased, scribbled in margins, referring to passengers unaccounted for, yet present. That phrase stuck with me, haunting my every thought. How could people be both missing and still present? When I finally tracked down one of the surviving relatives, an elderly woman whose husband vanished on that train, her answer chilled me more than the dusty archives ever could. With trembling hands, she showed me a letter. The handwriting was her husband's. The date on the letter was from 1979, more than 25 years after the train vanished. The letter read only one line. "We are still on the train." The old woman's eyes were clouded with cataracts, but the fear in them was sharp as glass. Her fingers trembled when she pressed the fragile letter into my hand, as though it carried a curse. "It arrived in the post," she whispered. "No return address. No explanation. Just that one sentence. My children told me to burn it, to forget. But I couldn't. Because it was his handwriting. I would know it anywhere." I studied the faded ink. The script was uneven, as if written under duress, the pen digging too hard into the paper. The date, 1979, sat in the corner like a cruel taunt. By then, her husband should have been 26 years dead. "How is this possible?" I asked. She only shook her head. "They never died. Not properly." Those words followed me out of her house and into the night. The next morning, I began combing through old newspapers from Zurich and Milan, hoping to find anything buried in small columns or forgotten local reports. After hours of microfilm, my eyes burning, I found it, a small article dated July 1953. It mentioned a train delay near the Italian border, then ended abruptly. What struck me wasn't what was written, but what was missing. There were no follow-ups. No explanations. A train filled with people had been erased from history. I wasn't satisfied. I needed more. Through a contact at the university, I tracked down another family member, a man named Emile whose father had vanished aboard the train. Emile was cautious when I approached him. "You're not the first journalist to come knocking," he said, his voice low. "But you might be the first fool desperate enough to keep digging." He led me into his home and produced a small wooden box. Inside were photographs, passengers smiling on the platform waving goodbye, tickets neatly folded. And one more artifact, a pocket watch stopped at 3:17 p.m., the exact time the train had entered the tunnel. "My grandfather swore this watch started ticking again in the 1970s, Emile said, his knuckles white as he clutched it. "Just for a moment. He said he heard it in the night. Ticking then screaming." The pattern was becoming clear. Something about that train hadn't simply disappeared, it was still moving, somewhere, somehow. And then came the detail that made my blood run cold. In Emil's records was a clipping from a fringe magazine, dated 1982. It claimed hikers near the Swiss border had seen a train moving silently across the landscape, though no tracks existed in that region. One witness swore he could see passengers staring blankly out the windows, faces pale, pressed to the glass, mouths open in silent cries. The article had been dismissed as nonsense, the ramblings of drunks. But paired with the letter with a pocket watch, it no longer felt like fantasy. It felt like a warning. Because if the train never stopped, if it was still moving after all these years, then its passengers weren't just missing. They were trapped. And some part of me feared I'd just stepped onto the same tracks. Train. The further I dug, the more I realized the disappearance of the train wasn't simply an accident. It was a wound in history stitched over by unseen hands. My next lead came from the National Archives in Rome, where I was granted access to a dusty collection of transportation records. Most files were mundane: delays, schedules, maintenance reports. But one box, marked restricted, had a thick black line through its label. When I requested it, the clerk's smile faltered. "That box isn't for public view," he muttered. I leaned in. "What if I told you I've already spoken to the families?" His jaw clenched, but a few minutes later, when no one was watching, he slid me the file across the counter. Inside were brittle, yellowed documents. The first was a typed report from July 1953, stamped with Militare Riservato, Military Confidential. It described the train's departure from Zurich, its passage through the Gotthard Tunnel, and then, nothing. No record of arrival. No emergency response. No official explanation. Just 2 words underlined 3 times in red ink. Anomalo evento. Abnormal event. My pulse quickened as I read further. Tucked between reports was a testimony from a railway worker named Lorenzo Bianchi. It was written hastily, almost frantically, and had been marked with, "Do not release." When the train entered the tunnel, I swear I heard screaming. Not mechanical failure, screaming like hundreds of voices at once. The ground shook beneath my feet and the lights in the control booth flickered. When I looked back at the tunnel mouth, it was as if the train had been swallowed by darkness thicker than night. Not a single sound came out. When we went in minutes later, the tunnel was empty. Empty. There was no record of Lorenzo after this testimony. His personnel file simply ended. Another page revealed something even stranger, a typed memo from Italian authorities to Swiss officials, instructing them to avoid public disclosure and discourage unnecessary speculation. At the bottom, a chilling line was scrawled in pen. If the phenomenon recurs, immediate quarantine must be enacted. Phenomenon. Not accident. Not disaster. Phenomenon. I sat in the archive room long after the lights dimmed, the weight of the documents pressing down on me. I could feel it in my gut. This was more than a missing train. It was a cover-up spanning nations, decades, maybe even generations. When I finally left, the clerk caught me at the door. He leaned in close, whispering as if the walls themselves might be listening. "You should stop now," he said. "Everyone who goes too deep into this story changes. They don't come back the same." I wanted to laugh it off, but his expression was dead serious. That night in my hotel room, I spread the documents across the bed. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint watermark on the corner of one report. Under the lamp, it revealed the emblem of an obscure psychiatric hospital in northern Italy, long since closed. What would a mental institution have to do with a missing train? My heart sank as a thought came to me. Maybe the passengers hadn't simply vanished. Maybe they had been found. And someone decided they weren't fit to return. The psychiatric hospital lay deep in the Lombardy countryside, abandoned for decades. Locals called it La Casa dei Senza Voci, the House of the Voiceless. Reaching it wasn't easy. The roads narrowed into crumbling dirt tracks, swallowed by weeds and silence. The building itself rose out of the mist like a decaying monument, arched windows shattered, its facade streaked with moss. A wrought iron gate, bent and rusting, bore the institution's nameplate, Sanatorio di Santa Lucia. When I pushed the gate open, it groaned like a wounded animal. Inside, the air smelled of mold and old medicine. Wallpaper peeled in strips, exposing cracked plaster beneath. Doors hung loose on their hinges. My flashlight beam cut across graffiti, satanic symbols, teenagers' scribbles, warnings like, "Don't listen to them," scrawled in jagged letters. But what unsettled me most was the silence. Even abandoned places have their sounds, the drip of water, the rustle of rats. Here, there was only stillness, as if the building itself was holding its breath. In the records office, drawers lay overturned, paper scattered across the floor. Most files had been destroyed or eaten away by mold, but a few folders remained intact. I flipped one open and froze. Inside were patient intake forms dated 1953, the same year the train vanished. The names matched some of the missing passengers. Mothers, fathers, children. They had been admitted here, but under new identities as if their real lives had been erased. Diagnosis: severe psychosis following transit event. One file, belonging to a man named Johann Keller, contained a photograph. His face was distorted, not by age but by something unnatural. His eyes completely black, his mouth fixed in a half-smile that looked carved rather than genuine. Scrawled on the back in hurried handwriting: "Not human anymore." Deeper into the hospital, I found the experimental ward. Rusted gurneys lay scattered, straps still buckled as if waiting for patients who never left. Jars of preserved tissue samples lined the shelves, labels faded to smudges. And in the center of the room, I discovered a large ledger bound in leather, its pages brittle but legible. It was a logbook of experiments. Subject number 12, vocal cords removed. No effect. Subject continues to emit whispers. Subject number 27, skin grafting unsuccessful. Regeneration observed within 24 hours. Subject number 45, resistance to sedatives. Eyes remain open during surgery. Each entry was signed by Dr. Vittorio Graziani, Chief Medical Officer. And at the bottom of one page a chilling note: the passengers are no longer of this world. They belong to the void between places. Containment is impossible. Assimilation is the only path. The ledger slipped from my hands. My pulse hammered. This wasn't just an accident or even a cover-up. It was transformation. Those passengers had been changed into something neither human nor entirely gone. As I collected myself, a sound echoed through the corridor. A shuffle. Then another. I killed my flashlight hard in my throat. From the darkness I heard it, a low, ragged whisper. At first it was just one voice. Then two. Then dozens, overlapping, murmuring words I couldn't understand. The voices were coming closer. I stumbled back, searching for the exit. My light flickered on for a second, just long enough to see shapes in the hallway. Figures with hollow eyes and twisted smiles, their skin stretched too thin as if they were caught between worlds. And then, darkness again. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back at my hotel, gasping for air, my hands shaking too violently to turn the key. When I finally locked the door, I realized I had brought something with me. The ledger. And when I opened it again, there was a new entry written in fresh ink. Subject number 96, journalist. Exposure confirmed. Transformation in progress. For days after leaving the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. Not a person, not in the ordinary sense, but a presence. It began subtly. My reflection in the mirror lingered a split second longer than my movements. My voice, when recorded, carried an unnatural echo as if someone else was speaking with me. And at night, when the world went quiet, I would hear faint rhythmic sounds outside my hotel window, like the clatter of train wheels against steel. I pored over the ledger, desperate for answers. The final chapters described what the doctors called Phase 3. Subject's body begins resisting decay. Facial muscles contort, creating mask-like expressions. Internal clock no longer aligned with linear time. Subject reports hearing trains at night, though none pass nearby. One line had been underlined 3 times. The passengers no longer belong to our world. They hear the call of the train and follow it. The implications froze my blood. The people from that train weren't dead, they were changed. And I, by reading, by witnessing, was becoming one of them. The transformation quickened. My skin itched constantly as if something beneath it wanted to push through. Food lost all taste except for raw meat, which I began to crave with a hunger that disgusted me. Worst of all, my dreams became identical each night. I stood on a foggy platform. The station loudspeakers crackled with static, then a distorted voice announced arrivals in a language I didn't recognize. A black locomotive screamed into view, lights dim, doors sealed shut. Faces pressed against its windows, warped, hollow, unblinking. They looked at me as though they recognized me. And every time the dream ended the same way, the train doors began to open. Desperate, I returned to the archives, searching for corroboration. I uncovered a series of classified government memos stamped with heavy black ink. Subject: missing Milan train 1953. Status: non-recoverable. Containment protocol: silence witnesses. Destroy secondary evidence. Suppress local press. But one memo stood out. It wasn't official, It was handwritten and unsigned. The train does not travel through space but through time. The passengers are not lost, they are waiting. Each time the cycle completes, new witnesses are drawn in. I realized with horror what this meant. The missing train wasn't gone. It was still running, endlessly circling some liminal track between worlds. And soon it would return. That night the dreams changed. The platform was no longer empty. I wasn't alone. Around me stood others, dressed in clothes from different eras. Men in 1950s suits, women in old dresses, even children holding ragged toys. Their skin was pale, their eyes black voids, their mouths curved into grotesque smiles. One by one they turned their heads toward me. "You're late," they whispered in unison. Behind them, the black train screeched into the station. This time the doors hissed open fully. Inside, I glimpsed rows of seats filled with silent passengers, their heads jerking in unnatural unison, eyes fixed on the doorway. A conductor stepped out. His face was hidden beneath a cracked porcelain mask, painted with a smile. He held out a hand, waiting for my ticket. When I awoke, my pillow was damp with blood. I touched my mouth and realized my teeth had sharpened overnight. The ledger had one last warning, scrawled in the margins like a confession. There is no escape. Once you hear the train, it will come for you. That night, I didn't just hear it in my dreams. I heard it for real, the whistle of a locomotive, distant but growing closer. The rumble of wheels vibrating through the floor. I ran to the window. There was no track, no station, just a black void stretching across the street. And out of that void, the train emerged, headlights glowing faintly, metal screeching as it slowed. The platform appeared below my window. Dozens of hollow-eyed passengers stood there, smiling up at me. And then I heard the conductor's voice, calm, cold, and human. "Final boarding call." The sound of the whistle split the night like a blade. My room shuddered, though outside there were no tracks, no station, only the impossible apparition of a platform birthed from darkness. I should have run. I should have screamed. Instead, I found myself walking toward the window as though pulled by invisible strings. My reflection in the glass was no longer mine, its mouth stretched too wide, its eyes unblinking, its teeth sharp and glistening. It smiled even when I did not. The train's door slid open. Warm, fetid air poured out, thick with the stench of rust and rot. Inside, rows of passengers sat perfectly still. Their heads turned toward me in unison, black eyes gleaming like polished coal. I knew their faces. I had studied their missing person files for weeks. Men and women who had vanished in 1953, and yet they hadn't aged a day. The conductor stepped down. That porcelain mask, cracked and painted with a smile, tilted toward me. He held out a hand, not an invitation but an inevitability. His voice rattled like an old speaker, distorted and mechanical. "Your journey begins where there's never ended." I backed away, clutching the ledger. "No," I whispered. "I'm not one of them." But the words in the book shifted before my eyes, rewriting themselves in fresh ink. "Witnesses are passengers in waiting." I dropped it. The whistle shrieked again, and the walls of my room dissolved into fog. The hotel was gone. I stood now on the platform, cold wind biting my face, the black locomotive towering above me. The passengers raised their hands in eerie unison, beckoning me forward. One child, her face pale and waxy, whispered my name. My name. I turned to run. There was nowhere to go. Fog swallowed the world in every direction. The platform stretched into infinity, the train pulsing like a living thing. And then I realized the truth. This wasn't a station. It was a trap. A place outside of time. The conductor's hand hovered inches from mine. I felt my body betraying me, stepping closer. My mind screamed, but my legs obeyed a different command. I made one final choice. As the door yawned open wider, I pulled away, not toward freedom but toward the edge of the platform. Below was only void. Endless black. A fall into nothingness. Better that than whatever waited on that train. I leapt. The wind roared. My body twisted in the abyss. For one heartbeat I thought I had escaped. Then through the darkness came a flash of light. Headlamps. Screeching wheels. Steel grinding against steel. The train was there below me waiting. I crashed onto its roof. Pain exploded through me and then the world dissolved. I woke in a seat. The windows were blackened, but I didn't need to see outside to know. The train was moving. The passengers around me sat motionless, their smiles carved into permanence. I tried to scream, but my mouth moved in silence. My reflection in the window smiled back at me with that same porcelain mask of flesh. The conductor's voice filled the carriage, soft, eternal. Next stop, nowhere. The whistle cried one last time. and the train rolled on forever.